Great Britain and Germany issuing travel advisories for its citizens stupid enough to visit the United States of America. 3 German citizens were recently arrested and detained while trying to enter this country for no reason. The Guardian now reporting Canadian visits to the United States down 23% via car, down 13% via air travel for the month of February. A Canadian actress and wellness influencer visiting on a work visa was held in an ICE detention facility for 2 weeks, sometimes in solitary confinement, sometimes handcuffed and in chains. Writing for The Guardian, Jasmine Mooney, who also appeared in the movie American Pie, she recounted her experience in several ICE detention facilities. Go read that article. She was detained on March 3rd in San Diego after there appeared to be a problem with her work visa, which had been good for 3 years. She has no criminal records. But some bureaucrats with power decided to mess with her because they could. 2 weeks in several ICE detention centers, sometimes handcuffed, sometimes in shackles, sometimes in solitary confinement, forced to sleep on the floor, a floor of concrete, in a windowless prison with only an aluminum foil blanket, open toilets. She said she felt like she had been kidnapped and unable to call anyone for days. Read the article in The Guardian. Solitary confinement. No crime, just confusion over her work visa. And she was constantly being told 2 weeks in ICE detention centers, you're not being charged with a crime. Well, why can't I leave? No answer. Mooney quoted in The Guardian saying, quote, I have never seen in my life anything so inhumane as these detention centers. She went on to say, I was put in a cell. I had to sleep on a mat, no blanket, no pillow, just aluminum foil wrapped over my body like I was dead. It took 3 days before she was ever allowed to make a phone call to a lawyer. 3 days. I spent 1 night in jail. 3 days without being able to call a lawyer. And I was charged with a crime. She wasn't charged with a crime. No lawyer. This is what she wrote. Her name is Jasmine Mooney, and I strongly urge all Americans to read her piece in The Guardian. I strongly urge anyone who's thinking of coming to America as a tourist to read this article in The Guardian. This is what Jasmine Mooney wrote, quote, it was surreal listening to my friends recount everything they had done to get me out, working with lawyers, reaching out to the media, making endless calls to detention centers, desperately trying to get through to ICE or anyone who could help. My friend said the entire system felt rigged, designed to make it nearly impossible for anyone to get out. The reality became clear. ICE detention isn't just a bureaucratic nightmare, it's a business. These facilities are privately owned and run for profit. Companies like CoreCivic and Geo Group receive government funding based on the number of people they detain, which is why they lobby for stricter immigration policies. It's a lucrative business. CoreCivic made over $560 million from ICE contracts in a single year. In 2024, Geo Group made more than $763 million from ICE contracts, some of the biggest contributors to Trump's 2024 campaign. She goes on to write, the more detainees, the more money they make. It stands to reason that these companies have no incentive to release people quickly. What I had experienced for 2 weeks in detention was finally starting to make sense. That's Jasmine Mooney. And that's how they treat a white person. Imagine how those 300 Venezuelans and El Salvadorans are being treated. Well, I showed you the pictures of the prisons in El Salvador. To my foreign listeners, come to America. Come to Disneyland. Come to Disney World. Come to Branson. Explore America. See our detention facilities. Canada's interim Prime Minister, Mark Carney, called a snap election for April 28th. He called Trump's tariffs, quote, among the most significant threats of our lifetimes. Carney says he and Trump have not spoken in the 9 days he's been Canada's interim Prime Minister. Carney said, quote, he wants to break us, Trump. He wants to break us so America will own us. We will not let that happen. Carney says Trump must acknowledge Canada's sovereignty before meaningful discussions between the two nations can begin. And Trump still calling on Canada to become our 51st state. Usha Vance, the vice president's wife, and Mike Waltz, Trump's national security advisor, are visiting Greenland this week, not being invited. They're just paying a visit to Greenland. What an efficient use of our government. Commerce Secretary and homunculus Howard Lutnick said seniors shouldn't be worried if their Social Security check is delayed a month. Lutnick is a billionaire who, up until becoming Commerce Secretary, ran the Wall Street investment firm Cantor Fitzgerald. He has since turned the company over to his son. Lutnick said only fraudsters would complain if their Social Security check didn't arrive. He said honest Americans trust the government and wait for their check to come patiently, even if it takes a month or two. He talked about his 90-year-old mother and said if her Social Security check was a month or two late, she wouldn't complain because she's an honest person. Yeah, and the mother of a billionaire who doesn't need her Social Security check. The acting head of the Social Security Administration threatened to shut the entire agency down if Elon Musk's Department of Government Efficiency was denied access to the files of every Social Security recipient in America. Acting Social Security Commissioner Leland Dudek said he had to consult lawyers for the Social Security Agency to determine whether Social Security can even function after a judge ruled that Elon Musk and his Doja crew couldn't access what are essentially top secret files, your Social Security information. Acting Social Security Commissioner Leland Dudek said on Friday, if Musk can't do his job, then nobody in the agency can. Well, Judge Ellen Lipton Hollander of the U.S. District Court for the District of Maryland issued a 2-week restraining order prohibiting Musk and the Doja crew from being handed these top secret Social Security files. That's what prompted Leland Dudek, acting Social Security Commissioner, to say he may have to shut down all of Social Security and your checks won't arrive. The judge immediately admonished Dudek after he said he might have to shut down all of Social Security and your checks won't arrive because of the judge's order. The judge wrote to Dudek telling him her order only applies to Doja employees. Dudek issued an apology late Friday saying that after receiving clarifying guidance from the judge, Social Security checks will continue to go out during this temporary restraining order, blocking the Department of Government Efficiency from looking at Social Security files. Earlier this month, Dudek, acting Commissioner of Social Security, apologized for ordering all parents of newborn babies in Maine to show up personally at their local Social Security office to sign their kid up for Social Security. Now, in the past, the hospitals in Maine registered the babies with Social Security to save parents much needed time. That's how it's done in all 50 states, except for some reason, suddenly in Maine, parents of newborn babies had to go to Social Security personally. Why did this happen? Because Maine's Democratic Governor Janet Mills said, quote, "See you in court," to Donald Trump during a meeting of our nation's governors when she challenged to his face Trump's ban on transgender athletes competing in public school sports. He had said, if you don't obey this executive order, I will cut your funding. And she said in front of all the governors, see you in court. And Trump can't allow that because he suffers with delusions of grandeur that spring from a narcissistic personality disorder. When you challenge someone with a borderline personality in public, his only recourse is seeking revenge. So suddenly parents of newborn babies are inconvenienced. It took a few days for Social Security to finally revert to its old policy, but the message to Governor Janet Mills of Maine was very clear. Do not mess with me. On Saturday, Trump, out of nowhere, demanded the governor of Maine issue a full-throated apology for talking to him that way. Political science professor Stephen Levitsky wrote How Democracies Die. Came out during the first Trump administration. It's a great book. He was asked by the New York Times this week to assess the first 2 months of the Trump administration and compare it to other authoritarian regimes he's written about. Professor Levitsky said, honest to God, I've never seen anything like it. We look at these comparative cases in the 21st century, like Hungary, Poland, and Turkey, and in a lot of respects, this is worse. He goes on to say, these first 2 months have been much more aggressively authoritarian than almost any other comparable case I know of. Wow. Well, boycott. That's my message. Boycott. Boycott businesses, boycott people who support the Trump administration. Don't argue with Trump supporters. Boycott them. Ignore them. Go to your city council meeting. Go to town halls. Join Indivisible. Write letters, make phone calls, work for, not against the Democratic Party, no matter how distasteful that might seem. Chuck Schumer is not your enemy. Support Bernie, support AOC, but be a Democrat. Since Trump was sworn in again, I told you pay attention to the real pain points. I told you he would go after the migrants. I said that will be our first fight, and I was correct. Fight for the return of those 300 migrants who are currently being housed in El Salvador prisons. Trump is already threatening to send American citizens who vandalized Teslas down to those prisons in El Salvador. Fight for Mahmoud Khalil, the pro-Palestinian protester detained in Louisiana. Fight for him, especially if you're a Jew, especially if you're a Zionist. I told you about the Canadian actress who was detained for 2 weeks, often in solitary confinement, often in chains and shackles, for no crime. She explained it's big business to lock us up. My black listeners could have told us that before Trump was president. When you shave a Venezuelan man's head and photograph him, he's going to look like a gang member, especially if he has a tattoo celebrating his favorite soccer team or a tattoo celebrating Michael Jordan. We're hearing a lot of parents of these Venezuelan migrants shipped to El Salvador saying, my son isn't a criminal. He's not a gang member. You shaved his head and there's a tattoo on his arm celebrating Michael Jordan. He's not a gang member. Tom Homan, our border czar, this POS, and Donald Trump, the other POS, say all 300 migrants shipped to those torture chambers in El Salvador have been thoroughly vetted, and they are all gang members, criminals, even though they offer no proof, even though an ICE official told the judge overseeing this case that many of the Venezuelans sent to El Salvador had no criminal records. I told you before Trump was sworn back in, the fight for our country begins with these migrants. This is where we hold the line. We have zero proof that any of these migrants are gang members or criminals. And even if they are gang members, even if some of them have criminal records, they belong, if they're criminals, in our prisons, not El Salvador's. Don't waste time talking to Trump supporters. Don't waste time on social media. Get out your pen and start writing postcards. Get out your cell phone and start calling your representatives. Work locally. Everyone has power. Each state, each city, your home is a potential asylum for these migrants. Your church, your mosque, your temple, your place of worship is an asylum for these migrants. Call on religious leaders to stand up for these migrants, especially the ones who were shipped to El Salvador. They've got to be brought back to America. You see the crowds coming out to hear Bernie and AOC. You're not alone. They're alone. Trump is alone. That's why they behave this way. They're lonely, frightened little men. So, join Indivisible, join protest groups, but don't get arrested and don't break the law. Exercise your First Amendment rights by defending those 300 migrants sent to El Salvador. Fight for every pro-Palestinian activist being deported or held in an ICE detention facility. I'm David Feldman, reminding you to stay strong and protect the weak. More shows all this week. Please leave a comment. Please like this episode so I remain in your feed. Please share it. Subscribe to my channel. Subscribe to my newsletter. Thank you for listening to me.